how do I become a deep person? How do I become a person of depth? And so if you have your Bibles, turn to Matthew 7, 24 through 29, and I'll read the passage out loud. Here's what it says. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine, puts them into practice, is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. And yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teachings, because he taught as one who had authority and not as one of the teachers of the law. In verse 24, we pick it up with Jesus saying, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine. Now, by words of mine, Jesus means his entire message, his Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 4, 5, and 6. You know, I like what a New Testament scholar N.T. Wright said about this passage. He said this was good news, not just good advice. You see, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is inviting you and I into a deep, rich kingdom life where we can experience what is called life and life in all its fullness. And this invitation is for everyone. It's for you and I who listen to this mediocre message about the Sermon on the Mount. It's for Jesus' original audience. It's for those who read the Sermon on the Mount in the Bible today. It's for all. And it's not for just the Navy SEALs of the church. It's not for the elite with a great college education. In fact, Jesus was speaking this sermon on a countryside among everyday people, farmers and fishermen and carpenters, some of whom had never had a formal education ever. And then in verses 24 through 27, he now gives an illustration of two builders, one who builds his house on a solid foundation and one who builds their house on sand. See, Jesus grew up near the Sea of Galilee, and the sand that was around the Sea of Galilee would often become very hard in the summer hot months, just like concrete. And it would be very tempting if you were needing to build a house or a structure to build it on that sand because it looked so strong and solid. But a wise builder, one that knew the surfaces, would know not to be tempted to build it on that top, surface. Instead, they would dig down deep, sometimes 10 feet down, to the bedrock of the surface and build their house on the rock. And in the hot Middle Eastern summers, when they ended and the rains came in the winter, the Sea of Galilee overflowed along with its rivers. And the houses that were built foolishly on the top surface, on the sand, would become unstable. But the houses built on the bedrock, 10 feet deep, would withstand the floods. The illustration is a comparison of two people, the wise and the foolish, and the life that they built. All of us are building a life, not building a house, but we're building a life. You are building a life, I'm building a life. And I love what John Mark Comer says about building a life. He says, a life is built up of how you use your time, your habits, how you view others, even in their worst moments, how you view yourself, how you treat people, what you worship, what you pray to, what you purchase, how you view money. You and I are building a life, and it's built on the decisions that we make every single day. In fact, there's an entire industry out there called life coaching. And for a lot of money, somebody will help coach you on how to build a successful life. I think about people like Jocko, who's a life coach and a podcaster and an influencer. And if you pay him a lot of money, he will tell you to get up at 4 a.m., work out, meditate, plan out your day. And what he's trying to do is to get you to build a successful life in this world's standards. Jesus, in our passage, is comparing how a wise person builds their life versus a foolish person. See, a wise person in Jesus' day was not just an intelligent person, but a moral person. This is a person of depth. They were able to see the realities of their world and choose to live a godly life and a meaningful life in their day. A wise person, this deeply rooted person, is then compared to a foolish person. And the foolish person in this passage, the Greek word for fool literally means moron. This is a person who never learns from their mistakes. It's a person who never reflects deeply about what they're building their life on, or what's motivating them, or their values, or their time, or if the relationships they're part of are even healthy. Now in the story, the wise man's house that was built on the rock stands when the storm comes, but the foolish person's house collapses because it's built on the sand. And the key word that separates the wise person from the foolish person is found in verse 24, and it's the word practices, or it can be translated acts or obeys. Jesus says, everyone who hears my sermon or message and puts it into practice or obeys it or acts on it, that's the wise person. The wise person in Jesus' eyes is a person who hears his teachings and puts it into practice. They act on it, they live it, they embody it. It's the person who builds their life on practicing and obeying Jesus' teachings. That's the deep person in Jesus.